The emergency room doors hadn't finished swinging open before Claire Whitmore was shoved backward into the hallway. "You're not needed in there." The SEAL commander didn't even look at her when he said it. She caught herself on the doorframe, straightened, and said nothing. 40 seconds later, the explosion tore through the service corridor like the building had swallowed a grenade. Then the gunfire started. And while trained soldiers scrambled for cover, while veteran nurses flattened themselves against the walls, the young woman they'd just thrown out was already moving. She already knew exactly where the attackers were coming from. Before this story goes any further, if you've never been here before, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week, this channel brings you stories like this one: real tension, unexpected heroes, and endings nobody sees coming. Tap like if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, stay with me. Because what Claire Whitmore did next is something nobody in that hospital was prepared for. The shift started at 6:15 in the morning, which meant Claire had been awake since 4:30. She didn't mind the early hours. She had trained herself out of sleeping past 5 during her second deployment, and that particular habit had never fully unwound itself, even 3 years after she'd turned in her uniform. Her apartment was 12 minutes from Coastal Summit Medical Center. She'd timed it on her third day in Tacoma. And she used those 12 minutes the same way she used most empty time, observing. The route to work took her past a police substation, 2 intersections with camera coverage gaps, a parking structure with a compromised gate arm, and a coffee cart run by a man named Desmond who always had her order ready before she reached the window. "Medium black, no sugar," Desmond said without looking up. "Same as always." She left exact change on the counter. That was the thing about Claire Whitmore. She didn't waste motion, she didn't waste words. She had spent 6 years in environments where both could get people killed, and even in a city as comparatively ordinary as Tacoma, Washington, she couldn't quite shut that part of herself off. She had stopped trying. Coastal Summit Medical Center was a Level 2 trauma facility with 412 beds, a recently expanded emergency department, and a reputation in the regional medical community for taking on cases that smaller hospitals transferred upward. It was also, by Claire's assessment, a building with 3 significant security vulnerabilities, 2 elevator banks that weren't monitored after midnight, and a service entrance on the east side of the building that the security desk checked approximately once every 2 hours. She had mapped all of it in her first week, not because she expected anything to happen, because she was Claire Whitmore, and mapping was what she did. She clocked in at 6:18, changed into scrubs, and went to the nursing station on the trauma floor to pick up her assignment sheet. Sandra Kowalski was already there, charge nurse, 12 years on the floor, the kind of woman who communicated mostly through the angle of her eyebrows. She handed Claire a clipboard without a greeting. Bed 7, post-op monitoring. Bed 12, IV change at 7. Bed 3 is discharging, so you'll clean and turn that room before the next admit. Sandra looked back at her computer screen. Stagger your rounds, don't pile up on the same end of the floor. Got it. And don't mess with the supply cart in Bay 4. I had it organized. Claire glanced at the supply cart in Bay 4, which was not organized by any definition of the word she recognized, but said nothing. She took the clipboard and started her rounds. The morning moved the way most mornings moved, the particular combination of institutional rhythm and suppressed urgency that characterized hospital work. Vitals, documentation, medication checks. A patient in bed 7 who kept insisting his pain was a 4. When every other indicator said it was closer to an 8, a patient in bed 12 who wanted to talk about her granddaughter in Sacramento, and a post-discharge room cleanup that took longer than it should have because someone had left a half-eaten container of yogurt in the bedside drawer. Claire worked through all of it without complaint. She had never been someone who needed the work to feel dramatic to do it carefully. She checked the patient in bed 7's chart 3 times because something in his respiratory pattern didn't match his reported pain level, and she flagged it for the attending physician on duty, Dr. Nolan Vance, who was 39, excellent with complex internal cases, and constitutionally incapable of taking nursing observations seriously. "His SATs are fine," Vance said, already walking away. "Post-op patients under report. It's normal." His rate increased 4 points in the last hour without corresponding exertion. Vance paused, not to reconsider, but to decide how to close the conversation. "Chart it and let me know if it drops below 92. Otherwise," he made a vague gesture toward the rest of the floor. You've got plenty of other beds. She charted it. She would check again in 40 minutes. That was what she did with things she couldn't force. She documented them, she tracked them, and she waited. At 10:47, the elevator at the end of the corridor opened and the morning changed entirely. There were 5 of them. Big men in civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes always fit on people who spent most of their lives in something else. They moved in a loose formation that looked casual and wasn't. The one at the center was the one who needed carrying. His left arm was wrapped in field dressing that someone had applied well, and his face had the particular gray-white color of blood loss that Claire recognized at a distance. The man on his left was supporting most of his weight, and the man leading the group had already made eye contact with Sandra at the nursing station and was producing identification before he reached the desk. "We need trauma available," he said. "GSW to the shoulder, secondary laceration to the upper arm, possible fracture. He's stable, but he needs imaging and a surgical consult." Sandra read whatever was on the ID, and her posture changed in a way Claire had never seen it change before. "Yes, of course. Trauma 2 is open." She reached for the phone. Claire was already moving, because the injured man's color had shifted in the 30 seconds since they'd come off the elevator, and the field dressing on his arm had a fresh bleed at the lower edge that whoever had applied it hadn't caught. "His dressing is bleeding through," she said, stepping toward the group. "If you'll let me." The man leading the group moved, not aggressively, but deliberately, into her path. He was approximately 6'2", with the kind of face that had been outdoors in difficult weather for most of its adult life, and he looked at her the way people looked at things they'd already categorized and set aside. "We've got it." "He's losing more than you're tracking," she said. "The bleed is at the inferior edge of the wrap, which means the original injury may be lower than the primary dressing covers. If you move him to trauma 2 without reevaluating the site, you risk—" "We've got it." His voice was flat and final. "Stand down." She stood there for a moment, then she stepped back. His name, she learned later from the chart Sandra was building at the desk, was Garrett Lund. The injured man was Specialist Declan Marsh. The others she would piece together from fragments over the following 2 hours. She didn't have names for all of them yet, only the formation they moved in and the way their eyes tracked the room in sweeping patterns every time they entered a new space. She recognized the pattern because she'd done it herself. Threat assessment. Habitual, continuous, and completely invisible to anyone who hadn't been trained to do the same thing. She went back to her patients. At 11:15, Sandra caught up with her at the nursing station. "They've requested limited floor access near trauma 2, she said, which was Sandra's way of delivering information she found mildly inconvenient. "Dr. Vance is handling the case directly. You're reassigned to beds 9 through 15 for the afternoon." "Fine." They also asked that non-essential staff avoid that corridor. Claire looked at Sandra. "What counts as non-essential?" Sandra's eyebrows gave their answer. She took the reassignment without argument, moved her clipboard, and continued working. Beds 9 through 15 gave her a sight line to the main corridor that trauma 2 opened onto, which she hadn't specifically sought but didn't ignore. She watched Garrett Lund make 2 phone calls in the hallway, both brief, both quiet. She watched him position one of his team members at the corridor junction, not obviously, just someone leaning against the wall with a phone out, but always facing outward, always tracking movement. She noticed the service elevator at the far end of the east corridor cycle twice in 20 minutes without a call being logged at the desk. She noticed it a third time at 11:40. She went to the supply room near the east corridor because she needed gauze for bed 11, which was true, and because the supply room had a window that looked out on the exterior service dock, which she wanted to see. The dock was empty. But the door at the base of the external stairwell, the door that required a keycard that only hospital maintenance and security staff possessed, was propped open with a yellow rubber doorstop. She stood at the supply room window for a moment. Then she took her gauze and went back to the floor. She flagged the security desk on her way past. "The external stairwell door on the east side is propped open," she said. The security officer, mid-50s, tired in the specific way of people 3 years past when they'd planned to retire, nodded. "Maintenance has been in and out all morning, probably theirs." "Is there a maintenance log for that door?" He looked at her. "I'll check." She could tell from his tone that he wouldn't, at least not immediately, so she went back to the floor and thought about the service elevator cycling 3 times without a call log, and the propped stairwell door, and the way Garrett Lund had made his second phone call facing the window rather than the wall. She pulled her phone and sent a brief text to the one person she still had in her contacts from her previous life. A woman named Torres, who worked in a capacity Claire never asked about, and who generally responded within an hour when the subject line contained the word verify. The subject line contained the word verify. Then she went to check on bed 11. Dr. Vance found her at the nursing station at 12:20, which was unusual enough that she looked up. The bed 7 patient, he said. His respiratory rate. 73.8 now, she said. Up from 69 at 11. I've been tracking it every 20 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. I'm ordering a new scan. I already filled out the requisition, she said. It's flagged for your signature. He signed it. He didn't apologize. She hadn't expected him to, but something in his expression shifted the way things shifted when a person recalibrated something they hadn't wanted to recalibrate. She filed the form. At 12:54, the fire door at the end of the east corridor banged open, not the automatic swing of the door responding to the release bar. The concussive bang of something hitting it from the other side with considerable force. Every head on the floor turned. The man who came through the door first was wearing civilian clothing, but the object in his right hand was not a civilian object. Claire had already pushed back from the nursing station before the second man came through the door behind him. Her mind registered the situation in components, the way it always had in the field. Entry point, number of contacts, their spacing, the angle of the first man's weapon, the distance to the nearest patient room, the nearest cover, the medical cart 6 feet to her left, the oxygen lines running along the ceiling above the east corridor, the position of every nurse and orderly she could see from where she was standing. The first man shouted something. Patients screamed. Sandra flattened herself behind the desk. Claire grabbed the medical cart and moved. She drove it hard down the east corridor, not toward the men, but at an angle that sent it skidding into the corridor junction, not a weapon, a distraction, and an obstacle, and pivoted into the nearest patient room as the first man swung his weapon toward the movement. The shot hit the wall above the cart. The sound in the enclosed space was enormous. She went through the patient room, a 60-year-old man with a hip replacement who stared at her with his mouth open, to the connecting door on the far side, through it, into the next room, through that room's door into the parallel corridor, and was already calculating the distance back to the trauma wing when she heard Garrett Lund's voice. "What the hell is happening? Get your team into trauma 2 and lock the door," she said, moving past him. "Secondary entry through the east stairwell, minimum 2 contacts, possibly more. Your man needs to stay in that room." He grabbed her arm. "Who are—" She looked at his hand on her arm. He released it. "How many in your team are armed right now?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "Our gear is in the transport." "Then get behind me or get in the room," she said. "Your choice." She didn't wait to see which he picked. The east corridor was empty when she reached the junction. The men had moved deeper into the floor, which meant they were working from a plan and not just running. They knew the layout, or they had something that told them the layout, which meant the propped stairwell door had not been accidental, and the security officer at the desk had almost certainly not checked the maintenance log. She needed a position. She needed something she could use. She went to the supply room at the end of the west corridor, the one with the external window, and confirmed that the service dock below now had a black panel van parked at its far edge, engine running, side door open. Extraction vehicle, standing by. She took 3 seconds to process the full picture. The men who'd come through the east corridor weren't running a chaotic raid. They were running a contained operation. They'd entered through a pre-staged access point. They had transportation waiting. They had come in fast, which meant they wanted this done quickly, and quickly meant they had a specific target and a specific window. Declan Marsh. The wounded man in trauma 2. She pulled open the supply room cabinet, took stock of what was there, and began moving. She grabbed 2 portable oxygen canisters, a trauma kit, a roll of medical tape, and the heaviest metal object available to her, which was a stainless steel IV pole. She went back into the corridor, located the nearest fire suppression panel, and, using the IV pole, broke the glass cover. The alarm that sounded was different from the one that would have activated from a smoke detector, louder, building-wide. It would bring the fire response units faster than a standard emergency call, and more importantly, It would tell anyone in the building still capable of making a rational decision where to go. She could hear the men somewhere on the east side of the floor, shouting in a pattern that told her they were trying to locate Trauma 2 and finding the floor less straightforward than their diagram had suggested. She pulled the alarm cover fully off, exposed the manual suppression trigger beneath it, and left it alone. She might need it, but not yet. Then she went to find the nearest way to cut the floor's power. The electrical panel for the trauma floor was in a maintenance alcove off the service corridor. She had located it during her third day, the same way she'd located everything else. She reached it in 90 seconds, identified the circuits for the east side corridor lighting, and pulled 2 breakers in sequence. The east corridor went dark. She heard someone swear from the other side of the building. Emergency lighting kicked in automatically. Low amber strips along the floor, enough visibility to navigate but none of the overhead brightness that made it easy to identify and track a target. She knew the floor. The men in the east corridor did not. She moved back through the maintenance alcove toward the sound of the voices, and she was calm in the specific way that she had always been calm during the moments that mattered most. Not because the situation wasn't serious, but because the part of her that had been built for this had quietly taken over. It was not something she had wanted to feel again. She felt it anyway. She found the first man at the corridor junction, disoriented by the darkness, weapon up, sweeping. And she came in from the angle the emergency lighting didn't cover, and she took him down fast and clean, no hesitation, no wasted effort, the IV pole becoming a tool she used with precision and then set aside. She stripped his weapon, checked it, and held it at low ready. The second man heard something and came around the corner 2 seconds later. She was already positioned, but was on the floor before he finished processing what he'd seen. She zip-tied both men using the medical tape in the trauma kit, improvised but sufficient, dragged them into the nearest patient room, and told the patient inside, a woman in her 70s who looked at her with extraordinary composure, "Don't open this door." "Wasn't planning to," the woman said. She went back to the main corridor. That was when she saw Garrett Lund standing at the junction, staring at her. He had come out of Trauma 2, which was not what she'd told him to do, but she could not spend time being angry about that right now. She used her left hand, the hand not holding the recovered weapon, to give him a quick 3-sign sequence. 2 contacts down, possible additional, get back. He stared at her. She gave the signs again, slower. His expression changed, his mouth opened. She held one finger to her lips. He closed his mouth. And then from somewhere below them, from the direction of the service elevator, or possibly the basement stairwell, came the sound of footsteps ascending. Multiple sets, moving with the deliberate pace of people who were not lost, who were not improvising, who knew exactly where they were going. She had neutralized the first 2 men, but there was a third team, and they were already inside the building, and they were heading upward with the kind of certainty that told her they had a different entry point than the ones she'd already mapped. Garrett Lund looked at her. She looked at the floor, calculating the ascent speed, the likely point of emergence, the distance to Trauma 2, and the number of people she had in position. The number was 1. The footsteps kept coming. The footsteps didn't slow. Claire counted the cadence against the ambient noise of the building. The alarm still cycling overhead, the distant sound of someone on a lower floor shouting into a radio, the mechanical groan of the service elevator that had not been called but was moving anyway. 3 sets of feet, maybe 4, moving with the unhurried pace of people who had a plan and believed it was still intact. They didn't know yet about the 2 men zip-tied in the patient room off the east corridor. That was her only advantage, and it had a shelf life measured in minutes. She turned to Garrett Lund and gave him 4 signs in quick succession: service stairwell, ascending contacts, hold position, do not engage without signal. He read all 4. She could see it in the way his posture shifted, not the surprise of someone who didn't understand, but the recalibration of someone who was reassessing what he was dealing with. His jaw was tight, his eyes were steady. "How many?" he mouthed. She held up 3 fingers, then added a 4th with a question mark tilt of her head. He nodded once and moved back toward the trauma wing without being told again. She went to the stairwell. The door to the service stairwell was at the far end of the maintenance alcove, a heavy fire-rated door with a small wire mesh window set at eye level. She positioned herself against the wall beside it, not in front of the window, and listened. The footsteps were louder now, 1 floor below, possibly less. Moving at that same controlled pace. She had 1 recovered weapon, 14 rounds in the magazine, and a building full of patients she could not move. She had also been in considerably worse positions than this, and the part of her that kept a running inventory of such things noted that with something close to dark humor. The door moved. She let the first man get 2 full steps into the corridor before she acted, because 2 steps meant he was committed and couldn't reverse cleanly, and it meant the door had swung back enough that the second man behind him was momentarily blocked by it. She took the first man down in a single controlled movement, not a strike intended to injure, but to redirect and ground, the kind of technique that prioritized speed over damage, and used his own forward momentum against the second man coming through the door, which bought her approximately 2 seconds of stacked confusion. The third man came in fast and smart, staying wide of the door frame instead of following directly, which told her he'd done this before and knew the funnel point was a liability. She had half a second to recalibrate before he had the angle on her, and she used that half second to do the only thing available. She dropped, rolled hard into the base of the wall, and came up inside his arm rather than outside it. It was ugly. Her left shoulder hit the baseboard with enough force to send a white flare of pain down her arm. She lost her grip on the recovered weapon for a moment. It skittered across the linoleum, and had to abandon it because the third man was already adjusting and going for her weapon arm was no longer viable. She fought him for 11 seconds. 11 seconds is a long time in a confined corridor. It is long enough to make several mistakes, and she made 2. She underestimated his reach on the second exchange, and she took a hit to the side of her jaw that she didn't fully deflect. The impact rattled her vision for one bad moment. But she had fought through worse vision than that, and he hadn't accounted for what she would do with the IV stand she'd left propped against the wall of the maintenance alcove. She reached it on the third pivot, swung it as a bar rather than a point, and ended the exchange. He went down. She stood over him, breathing harder than she wanted to admit, jaw throbbing, left shoulder sending complaints up into her neck. She retrieved the weapon, checked the corridor, cleared the stairwell door, confirmed no fourth contact. 3 men. Not 4. She'd been wrong about the number. She secured all 3 the same way she'd secured the first 2, medical tape, expedient, sufficient, and did a fast injury check on herself. The shoulder was bruised, not dislocated. The jaw was the same. She worked it back and forth, felt the ache settle into something manageable, and kept moving. She found a crash cart in the alcove nearest the service corridor and pushed it in front of the stairwell door. Not a real barrier. A noisemaker, a tripwire of sound if anyone else came through that door before help arrived. Then she got on the hospital intercom. The intercom panel was in the nursing station, which was currently empty of staff. Sandra had gotten everyone she could find behind locked doors, which was the right call, and Claire was not going to second-guess it. She keyed the overhead system and kept her voice flat and clear. Security breach contained on the trauma floor. East and service corridors secure. All medical staff hold current positions until all clear is given by law enforcement. Repeat, hold positions. She paused. This is Nurse Whitmore, trauma floor. Law enforcement, please respond to the East Service elevator bank on arrival. She released the key. For a moment, the floor was almost quiet. The fire alarm had cycled into its standby tone. The shouting from downstairs had stopped, and the only sound was the ambient hiss of HVAC and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Then the door to Trauma 2 opened, and Garrett Lund came out followed by 2 of his team. He stopped when he saw the corridor, the 3 men on the floor, the state of the maintenance alcove, the recovered weapons she'd lined up against the wall because leaving them scattered was a liability. He stood there for a moment. How many total? He finally said. 5 confirmed, she said. I don't have a number on whether there are more in the building. You took down 5 armed men. 4 of them weren't complicated. She picked up her phone from where she'd put it in her scrub pocket. Torres still hadn't responded. The third team was the problem. I made mistakes. He looked at the 3 men on the floor of the maintenance alcove, all of whom were secured and none of whom appeared to be getting up in the near future and seemed to be working through some internal recalibration. You want to tell me who you are? He said. She looked at her phone. Nothing from Torres yet. Later, she said. Right now I need to know what's in this building worth sending 5 men for. Garrett Lund's expression went somewhere she couldn't read. That's classified. There's a van at the service dock with the engine running, she said. They had pre-staged access through a propped stairwell door. This was a targeted extraction, which means they came here for something specific. And since the only non-routine element in this building today is your team, she looked at him steadily. It means they came here for Specialist Marsh. A pause. One of his team members shifted slightly. Why? She asked. I said it's classified. 6 people have been assaulted in my hospital, she said. 5 attackers are restrained and 1 is your medic. The police are 4 minutes away. You can keep it classified or you can tell me whether there's anything else coming so I can protect the people on this floor. He held her gaze for a moment, then, Marsh recovered intelligence during the operation where he was injured. Physical media. He still has it on him. And someone doesn't want that intelligence getting to a debrief. Someone was willing to do this to stop it, Lund said, which was a yes without being a yes. She processed that. So there may be additional contacts. There may be. She looked at the service dock window. The van was still there. Your team needs to secure that vehicle before the police arrive and approach it blind, she said. If there are additional contacts waiting in it, that's a hazard. Lund turned to the man on his left, shorter, stockier, with a burn scar along the left side of his jaw, and said, Kepner, Doc. The man named Kepner moved. Claire went back to the nursing station, pulled up the building schematic on the emergency management terminal, a function most nurses didn't know the station had, but she'd found it during her first week, and started running through the access points she hadn't yet confirmed. The basement had 3 entry points: the service dock, the loading bay on the north side, and the morgue access corridor on the west. She'd accounted for the service dock. She had no information on the other 2. She picked up the internal phone and called the security desk. It rang 11 times before someone picked up. A different voice than before. Younger, tighter. Security? This is Whitmore on the trauma floor. I need someone to physically check the north loading bay and the morgue corridor access right now. I'm not asking for a camera check. I need eyes. Ma'am, we've got law enforcement inbound and I'm supposed to I know law enforcement is inbound, she said. That's why I need those access points checked before they arrive. Because if there are additional contacts waiting at either location, they become a danger to the officers on arrival. Are you understanding me? A pause. I'll send someone. Send 2. And tell them to make noise when they approach, so anyone inside knows they've been seen. You don't want a confrontation, you want a deterrent. She hung up. She didn't know if the security officer would actually do it. She'd given him the right reasoning and the right instructions, and the rest was outside her control, which was a condition she had spent years learning to function inside of rather than rail against. She pulled her phone again. Torres had responded. The text was 3 lines. She read it twice, then a third time. The name at the top was not a name she recognized, but the organizational tag beneath it was one she did, and the word that appeared twice in the bottom line of the message was the same word that had been rattling around the back of her mind since she'd seen the propped stairwell door at 11:40. Insider. She put the phone in her pocket and stood very still for a moment, staring at the wall above the emergency management terminal. Someone inside Coastal Summit Medical Center had provided access. The keycard that propped that door didn't belong to the men who'd come through it. Keycard logs would show whether it had been physically used or cloned, but either way, someone on the inside had either provided the card or provided the information that made cloning it possible. The attack wasn't spontaneous. It had been coordinated, planned, and enabled from within the building. She thought about the security officer who hadn't checked the maintenance log. She thought about how the second team had moved with the specific confidence of people who knew the floor plan. She thought about the service elevator that had cycled 3 times without a call log. Someone had called it manually from inside. The police arrived 4 minutes and 20 seconds after the sirens became audible. She tracked it without meaning to. 3 patrol vehicles and then 2 more, and then the sound of boots in the stairwell and voices on radios, and the particular controlled chaos of law enforcement entering a scene they hadn't been able to pre-clear. She met the first officers at the junction between the main corridor and the east wing, hands visible, identification already in her left hand. "Nurse Whitmore," she said, "I've been on the radio with dispatch. 5 suspects secured, 2 in room 412, 3 in the maintenance alcove off the service corridor. 1 recovered weapon from each, lined up against the wall. I can walk you through the layout." The lead officer, a woman with sergeant stripes who moved like she'd responded to scenarios far worse than this, took her ID, looked at her, looked at the corridor and said, "Casualties? No fatalities. 2 patients in the East Wing may need a stress evaluation. 1 witnessed the initial breach directly. The staff sheltered in place. I have 1 contusion to the jaw and a bruised shoulder, neither requiring treatment." The sergeant, her name tag read Okafor, looked at Claire's jaw, which was purpling in a way that was becoming harder to ignore. "You were involved in the physical restraint of the suspects?" "Yes." Okafor looked at the corridor again. She had, Claire suspected, already done the math on what it meant that a single person had restrained 5 armed men in a hospital and was deciding how to file that particular calculation. "Okay," Okafor said. "Walk me through it." Claire walked her through it. It took 12 minutes. By the end of it, Okafor had stopped taking notes and was simply listening, which was how Claire knew she was being believed rather than processed. There was a difference, and she had learned over years to recognize it. "The van at the service dock," Okafor said. "Your officers approached it?" "Empty. Engine was still running." Okafor paused. Driver's side door was open. Someone left in a hurry. A 6th contact, one she hadn't accounted for. "The timing," Claire said. "When I broadcast on the intercom, that was approximately 9 minutes before you arrived. If the driver heard the broadcast, he knew it was over," Okafor said. "He had a 9-minute head start." Okafor got on her radio. She was still talking into it when another set of vehicles pulled into the lot below. Not police vehicles. Darker, unmarked, the specific shade of deliberately inconspicuous that practically announced federal. Garrett Lund appeared at her elbow. "That's our people," he said quietly. "Your people were faster than the police." "We called before you did." She looked at the vehicles pulling into the lot. "Then why weren't they here before the breach?" He didn't answer. She let it go. There were things in this situation that she wasn't going to get answers to today, and spending energy on them was wasteful when there were still things she could do. She excused herself from Okafor with a professional nod and walked back through the trauma wing toward the nursing station. Sandra Kowalski was there. She had come out of wherever she'd sheltered, an office at the far end of the corridor, it turned out, with 3 other nurses and a patient transport specialist, and she was standing at the nursing station with her arms crossed and her face doing something complicated that it didn't usually do. "Are you injured?" Sandra asked. "Bruised," Claire said. "Not seriously." Sandra looked at her jaw, then at the east corridor where law enforcement was moving through in visible sweeps, then back at Claire. "The patients," Claire said. "Bed 7 needs a check. His respiratory rate has been elevated all morning and he hasn't been given the new scan yet. The requisition is signed, it just needs to be routed. Bed 12 was due for an IV change at 1300, which we've missed, and beds 9 and 11 probably need vitals redone because the last cycle was interrupted." Sandra stared at her. "I know the floor was disrupted," Claire said, "but they still need their care." A long moment. Sandra's jaw moved slightly, the way it moved when she was working through something she didn't yet have language for. "Go check bed 7, Sandra said finally. "I'll handle 12. Claire went. The patient in bed 7, a 64-year-old named Bernard, who had been recovering from a routine surgery and had not asked for any of what his morning had become, was shaken but stable. His respiratory rate had come down 3 points since the breach, possibly from being still and horizontal rather than alert and tense. Claire checked his vitals, adjusted his oxygen, told him the scan would happen within the hour, and answered his questions about what was happening on the floor with the honest and limited version. There had been a security incident. It had been resolved. Law enforcement was on site. Bernard looked at her jaw. "That from the incident?" "It's nothing." "Looks like something," he said. "You focus on your oxygen," she said. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She charted his vitals, flagged the scan for expedited routing, and was moving toward bed 12 when she saw the 2 federal agents come onto the floor. They moved differently than the police. Not worse, just different. The particular geometry of people who were here because of the thing the police didn't know about yet. One of them went directly to where Garrett Lund was standing near the Trauma 2 door. The other one looked around the floor, made eye contact with Claire across the distance of the corridor and walked toward her. His ID said Supervisory Special Agent, and his name was Harwick. He was approximately 50, the kind of thin that came from not prioritizing food, and he had the patient expression of someone who spent most of his professional life listening to things that disturbed him without letting that disturbance show. "Nurse Whitmore," he said. "Agent Harwick. Can I ask where you received your tactical training?" She kept her expression neutral. "The Army." "What unit?" She looked at him. "Is this relevant to the investigation you're running?" "Directly," he said. "Because 5 armed and trained men are currently in restraints in a hospital, and the incident report says a nurse did it, and I'd like to understand what kind of nurse we're talking about." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't fishing. He was filling in a picture he'd already started drawing, which meant he either had access to information she hadn't given anyone, or he was considerably better at reading people than most of the federal agents she'd encountered. Possibly both. "I'll give you my service record," she said, "after I've finished my rounds." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not surprise, but something adjacent to respect, which was an expression she hadn't seen directed at her in a long time. "Fair enough," he said, and let her go. She finished her rounds. She changed the IV on bed 12, apologized to the patient for the delay, redid vitals on 9 and 11, flagged a medication timing issue on bed 10 that had nothing to do with the incident and everything to do with the fact that nobody had checked that chart since 11 o'clock. She documented everything. At 14:40, she was back at the nursing station when Kepner, Lund's man, the one with the burn scar, appeared at the junction of the corridor and stood there with his hands at his sides in the deliberate way of someone who had a thing to say and wasn't entirely sure how to say it. "Kepner," she said without looking up. "How did you know my name?" "Lund said it when he sent you to the dock." He was quiet for a moment. "The dock was clear when I got there. The driver was already gone." "I know. We think there was a 6th contact, a local asset." He paused. "Someone in the building." She looked up from the chart. "We're working on identifying them," he said. "Harwick's team is pulling access logs." She thought about the service elevator, about the key card, about the specific question she had been turning over since she'd gotten Torres's text. Not who from outside had organized this, but who from inside had made it possible. "Pull the elevator call logs separately from the access logs," she said. "The service elevator on the East Bank cycled 3 times before the breach without being logged at the main security desk. If someone called it manually from inside, that's a separate record from the keycard system." Kepner looked at her. "It's a different database," she said. "Building systems are siloed. Security desk monitors the access logs, but the elevator call logs go to facilities management. They don't cross-reference in real time." He took out his phone and typed something. "How do you know that?" "I mapped the building when I started here," she said. He looked up from his phone. "You mapped the building." "It's something I do," she said. He nodded slowly, the way people nodded when they were adding information to a profile that was growing faster than they'd anticipated. He went back to where the federal agents were clustered near the East Corridor. She returned to her charting. She was 3/4 through the documentation she needed to complete before she could hand off to the afternoon shift, which was 45 minutes away and would arrive to find a floor that looked like a very controlled kind of war, when her phone buzzed. Not Torres this time. A number she didn't have saved, but a local area code. She stepped into the medication room for 30 seconds of quiet and answered it. The voice was young, female, and careful in the way people were careful when they were about to say something they weren't supposed to say and had decided to say it anyway. "Is this Whitmore? The nurse on the trauma floor?" "Yes." "I work in facilities," the voice said. "I've been watching the elevator logs since the alarm went off, because I knew something was wrong from how the East Bank elevator was being called this morning. And I pulled the records like you said to, except I didn't know you said to, because the federal agent just told me someone on the trauma floor flagged the elevator issue, and I've been trying to reach someone for the last hour." A breath. "The manual calls on the East elevator between 11 and 12:15, they're all from the same ID tag, and the ID tag isn't maintenance." Claire felt the back of her neck go cold. "Whose tag is it?" she asked. A pause. The young woman on the phone sounded like she understood exactly what she was about to say and what it meant. "It's registered to Security Administration," she said. "Senior level. I don't want to say the name on this line." Claire looked at the door of the medication room. "Don't say it on this line," she agreed. "Go directly to the federal agents in the East Corridor. Ask for Harwick. Tell him only. Nobody else, not building security, not hospital administration. Harwick, specifically." Okay. Another breath. Is this going to be bad? Claire thought about the service elevator cycling 3 times, about the propped stairwell door, about the security officer who'd told her maintenance was responsible and hadn't checked the log. Yes, she said. It's going to be bad, but you're doing the right thing. She ended the call and stood in the medication room for a moment, processing. The 6th contact, the local asset, the insider who had propped the door and called the elevator and given 5 armed men the information they needed to move through Coastal Summit Medical Center like they owned it, was someone in the building's own security administration, which meant that every piece of information she had reported to the security desk this morning had gone directly to the people trying to breach the building, which meant the security officer who hadn't checked the maintenance log hadn't failed to check it. He had chosen not to. She thought about his face when she'd told him about the door. The tired face, the near-retirement face, the face she'd read as bureaucratic inertia. She'd been wrong about him. She had read him wrong and told him too much, and if the timeline had been 15 minutes tighter, it would have cost lives. She stood with that for a moment. Let it be what it was. Then she went back to her charting because Bernard in bed 7 still needed his scan routed, and the afternoon shift was going to arrive in 40 minutes to a floor that needed a clear handoff report. And being wrong about one thing did not mean she stopped doing the things she could do correctly. She was finishing the last section of the incident report. The hospital required them for any adverse event, and a firefight in the East Corridor met the threshold. When Sergeant Okafor appeared at the nursing station, she had the look of someone who'd gotten a piece of information in the last 10 minutes that had significantly expanded her understanding of the afternoon. Agent Harwick tells me you flagged the elevator issue, Okafor said. I flagged it to the federal team, Claire said. A facilities employee made the actual connection. Who she says she called because you told the security desk to pull the elevator logs separately. Okafor studied her. The security desk officer is currently being interviewed by the federal team. Okay? He's not doing well in the interview. Claire said nothing. Harwick also tells me there's something in your service record he'd like to discuss with you when you have a moment. She finished the last line of the incident report. Set her pen down. My shift ends at 15:30, she said. I'll be available after handoff. Okafor looked at her for a moment. The jaw, the shoulder she was holding slightly stiff, the chart she'd just finished documenting with the same handwriting she used on any other afternoon. You know, Okafor said, almost to herself, in 15 years, I've responded to a lot of scenes. Claire waited. I've never responded to one where the person who handled it was still finishing their paperwork, Okafor said. Claire looked at the incident report, then at the clock above the nursing station. The documentation is part of the job, she said. Everything else was also part of the job. She pulled the next chart toward her. But before she could open it, the trauma 2 door swung open, and Garrett Lund came out with Agent Harwick at his shoulder and an expression that had moved past recalibration into something considerably more urgent. Whitmore, Lund said. She looked up. Marsh is asking for you, Harwick said. Specifically, you. She set down her pen. Why? Lund glanced at Harwick, a fast, loaded glance that carried the specific weight of information they'd decided to share and information they hadn't. Because, Harwick said carefully, his condition changed 20 minutes ago, and the attending physician made a call. We need a second opinion on before we let anyone transfer him. She was already on her feet. What changed? His oxygen saturation dropped, Harwick said. Dr. Vance says it's within acceptable post-op variance. Marsh says it isn't. A pause. He also says, and I'm quoting directly, get the nurse who knew about my arm. She moved around the nursing station. She didn't run. Running created panic in a hospital corridor, and panic was a liability. But she moved with a speed that was only a degree short of it, and by the time she reached the trauma 2 door, she had already pulled Marsh's chart from memory and was running through the respiratory indicators she'd last checked. And what a drop in saturation combined with his existing injury profile might mean. She pushed the door open. Declan Marsh was awake, which he hadn't been before. I was pale and his breathing was shallow in the specific way that she recognized, not the shallow of sedation wearing off, but the shallow of something building pressure where pressure shouldn't be. Dr. Vance was standing at the foot of the bed. He turned when she came in, and the expression on his face was one she recognized from this morning. The expression of a man deciding whether to be defensive or correct, and not yet having made the call. She went to Marsh's bedside and looked at his chart, and then she looked at the rise and fall of his chest, and then she looked at the position of the original field dressing and the surgical repair that had been done over it. She picked up the stethoscope from the tray beside the bed and listened. For 6 seconds, the room was very quiet. Then she straightened and looked at Vance. "He has a pneumothorax developing on the right side," she said. "The injury was lower than the primary site covered, and the surgical approach didn't account for it. He needs a chest tube now, not tomorrow, not in an hour." Vance opened his mouth. "I flagged the original injury site this morning," she said. Her voice was very level. "You told me his SATs were fine." The room held very still, and Declan Marsh, lying in the bed with a developing pneumothorax and the gray-white color of a man whose body was filing serious complaints, looked at her with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and said, "Told you it wasn't variance." Vance was already reaching for the procedure tray. Claire kept her hand on Marsh's wrist, not checking his pulse, just the simple contact of someone who was there and wasn't leaving, and felt his hand, without any apparent conscious decision on his part, close briefly around her fingers. Then the monitors changed, and the door opened, and Vance was calling for additional support, and the room became the particular controlled urgency of a procedure about to happen under pressure. And somewhere in the building below them, in a security office, or a federal interview room, or a corridor that still smelled of the afternoon's violence, someone was sitting across from Agent Harwick and running out of answers. And on the east side of the building, in the parking structure that the tactical team had not yet fully cleared, a light on the 3rd level flickered twice and went dark. Nobody moved for 2 seconds after the monitors changed. That was the real number. Not the dramatic pause of a film scene, but 2 actual seconds of people registering that what they were looking at had shifted into a different category of urgency. Vance was the first to reach the procedure cart, which was the right call, and Claire didn't hold the previous hour against him for it, because in this moment he was a physician doing exactly what he was supposed to do, and she needed him functioning and not defensive. "Chest tube tray," Vance said, and the nurse who'd come in with the support team, a man named Pryor, whom Claire recognized from the afternoon shift, was already pulling it. Claire moved to Marsh's left side, opposite from where Vance would work, and kept her hand on Marsh's wrist. His pulse was elevated and thin, the specific quality of a cardiovascular system compensating for a pressure problem it couldn't fix on its own. "I've had worse," Marsh said. His voice was tight but controlled. "I know," she said. "Stop talking." He almost smiled. Then the anesthetic hit, and the smile went somewhere else. The procedure took 19 minutes. Vance worked with the focus of a man who'd set aside everything that wasn't the immediate mechanical problem, which was the version of Vance that Claire could respect without reservation. She monitored, she tracked, she handed instruments before they were asked for, and when the tube seated correctly, and the pressure began to equalize and Marsh's saturation curve started climbing back toward the range it was supposed to occupy, she felt the particular quiet satisfaction of a thing done right after a long stretch of things almost going very wrong. "Good," Vance said, mostly to himself. She checked the monitor. 89, 91, 93. "His rate is stabilizing," she said. Vance straightened. He stripped his gloves and stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, looking at the monitor. Then he looked at Claire. She waited. "The field dressing," he said. "You flagged it this morning." "Yes." "And the respiratory rate at noon." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that had work happening behind it. "I should have ordered the scan earlier." She didn't agree out loud because that wasn't useful. "He's stabilizing now," she said. "That's what matters." Vance nodded once, a short, contained motion, and began writing the updated orders. She noted that his handwriting was slightly less precise than it had been this morning, which meant the afternoon had cost him something too, and she filed that observation in the category of things that were true and that she would not mention. She stayed with Marsh until he was resedated and the monitors had settled into the reliable rhythm of a body no longer in active crisis. Then she stepped out of Trauma 2 into a corridor that had been transformed in the 4 hours since she'd clocked in. Coastal Summit Medical Center's trauma floor looked, superficially, like a hospital floor again. The police sweep had concluded. The federal agents had moved their interviews to a pair of requisitioned administrative offices on the floor below. The 2 men from room 412 had been transported out in custody 40 minutes ago, and the 3 from the maintenance alcove 20 minutes after that. What remained was the particular quiet of a space that had held something violent and not yet fully metabolized it. The cleaning crew working on the east corridor, the security tape across the stairwell door, the trauma cart she'd used as an obstacle still parked against the wall because no one had moved it yet. She moved it back to its proper position. She was doing that, the small restorative acts, the things that returned a space to functional, when Garrett Lund found her. He looked different than he had 6 hours ago. Not more tired specifically, but less armored. The particular quality of professional composure that his team ran as a default setting had thinned at the edges in a way she recognized as genuine. It happened when the debrief was over and the adrenaline had fully metabolized and the mind started accounting for everything it hadn't had bandwidth to process in real time. "Marsh is stable," she said before he could ask. "I know. Harwick told me." He paused. "Vance also told him that you flagged the injury site this morning. The record will reflect that. It will." He came to stand beside her, not close, the instinctive physical spacing of people who had fought in proximity but not yet established whether they were something other than strangers. "Harwick wants to talk to you tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." "I'm aware." "Do you know what he's going to ask?" She looked at him. "He's going to ask about my unit." Lund nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man who had looked at a file that contained information that revised his understanding of the afternoon considerably and was still in the process of deciding how to hold that revision. "He already looked at your record," he said, "the part that isn't sealed." "Then he knows what unit I was with." "He knows enough to want to know more." She resumed straightening the supply cart. "My record is what it is. I'm not going to give him a different version of it." "I'm not asking you to." He watched her work for a moment. "I want to ask you something." She didn't stop moving. "Ask." "Why nursing?" He's genuinely curious, the kind of curious that had been building all afternoon and had finally found a quiet enough moment to surface. You could have gone private sector, security contracting, threat assessment, half a dozen things that pay better and use your background more directly. She set down the package of gauze she'd been reorganizing, thought about the answer for a moment, not the polished version, the actual one. "Because in contracting, I was still measuring my days in targets," she said. "Even the defensive work, even the legitimate work." She picked the gauze back up. "I wanted to measure them in something else." He was quiet for a long moment. "Did it work?" She thought about the afternoon, about Bernard's scan and the IV she'd changed, and Marsh's saturation climbing back to 93. "Most days," she said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his posture changed back into the armored version. "Harwick's ready." She set down the gauze, pulled off her gloves, and went. The administrative office Harwick had requisitioned was on the 3rd floor, a meeting room with a glass wall that looked out over the internal atrium, currently occupied by Harwick, a second federal agent she hadn't met, and a laptop showing a document that he turned face down when she came in. She noticed the gesture. She was supposed to. "Sit down," Harwick said. Not unkindly. The tone of someone who had conducted enough of these to know that performative authority was less efficient than a chair and a direct question. She sat. "Sergeant Claire Whitmore," he said, 3rd Special Forces Group, later attached to a joint reconnaissance element, whose formal designation I'm not going to say, in this room. She said nothing. 2 overseas tours, 17 documented field operations, 4 of which generated after-action reports that were sealed at the theater commander level, not the unit level. He looked at her. "That's unusual." "Yes." "You were medically cleared on discharge. Honorable. No disciplinary record." He paused. "There are 6 months of your service that don't appear in your accessible record at all." She looked at the turned-down laptop. "Then they don't appear." "The people I called today to ask about those 6 months told me 3 things," Harwick said. "First, that you were among the most capable tactical medics your element had ever deployed. Second, that you left voluntarily and that the circumstances of your departure were reviewed and closed at the highest level available to them." He paused. "Third, that if I was asking about you in the context of an operational situation, I should extend you whatever professional courtesy I could." She kept her face still. "That's generous of them." The man who said it used different language, but the meaning was the same. Harwick leaned forward slightly. I'm not here to excavate your service record, Sergeant. I'm here because 5 armed operatives entered a protected facility today, targeting a member of a special operations team carrying recovered intelligence, and you stopped them. And I need to understand the full picture of what happened in this building so that I can prevent it from happening again. I gave Sergeant Okafor a full incident account. You gave her what happened inside the building, Harwick said. I need to know what you assessed before it happened. Because you flagged that stairwell door at 11:40. You flagged the elevator cycles. You texted a contact for a verification check before any breach occurred. He looked at her steadily. You knew something was wrong before the first man came through that door. She thought about how to answer that. Not because she was deciding what to conceal, but because accuracy mattered and she wanted to be precise. I didn't know something was wrong, she said. I assessed that the probability of something being wrong was high enough to warrant escalation. There's a difference. Walk me through the assessment. She did. She gave him the full sequence, the elevator cycles, the stairwell door, the team's arrival, and the decision to restrict floor access, the quality of movement she'd observed from Lund's men, the gap between those observations and the standard security posture of a civilian medical facility. She described the probability calculation she'd done and what it had produced, and the steps she'd taken as a result, and the point at which the calculation had stopped being a calculation and become a confirmed situation. Harwick listened without interrupting. The second agent took notes. When she finished, Harwick was quiet for a moment. The insider, he said. The facility's employee called me about the elevator logs. I told her to bring it to you specifically. She did. The security officer's interview concluded 40 minutes ago. He paused. He's cooperating. He provided access log information to an external contact over the past 3 weeks. He believed he was working for a legitimate security consulting firm conducting a facility assessment. He wasn't. No. Harwick's expression indicated what he thought of that particular operation. The firm is a front. We've been tracking its parent organization for 14 months in connection with a series of intelligence compromises. Marsh's operation intersected with one of those compromises, which is why he became a target. He looked at her. The 6th contact, the van driver. We have a partial plate. We'll find him. The insider was used, she said. He didn't know what he was enabling. His ignorance doesn't protect him legally, Harwick said, but it's a factor. She thought about the tired face, the near-retirement posture. What happens to him? That's not my determination. She accepted that. Some things were outside the boundary of what she could change, and spending force against those boundaries was waste. Is there anything else you need from me tonight? She asked. Harwick looked at her for a moment. One more thing. He reached into the folder beside his laptop, not the turned-down one, a different one, and produced a single page. He turned it toward her. It was a photograph, not a surveillance photo, a document scan, the kind produced when a physical file was digitized. The photograph showed 5 people in nondescript clothing in what appeared to be a staging area of some kind. Outdoors, dry climate, mid-afternoon light. She recognized the location before she recognized the faces. Her own face, younger, was third from the left. She looked at the photograph for a moment. Something moved through her that she didn't give a name to. Then she looked at Harwick. Where did you get this? It was in the intelligence package Marsh recovered, Harwick said, along with the identities and current locations of everyone else in that photograph. She looked at the photograph again. The person on the far right was someone whose name she hadn't said out loud in 3 years. The person on the far left was someone she'd been told was dead. That's not possible, she said, and her voice was level, but the words came out slightly slower than they should have. The person on the far left, Harwick said, was reported as killed in action in, he checked a note, an incident that was sealed at the same level as the 6 months of your record that don't appear. She was very still. He's alive, Harwick said, and based on what Marsh recovered, he's been working for the same organization that sent 5 men into this hospital today. The room was quiet for several seconds. Then Claire said, his name was Decker. We know. He and I were in the same element for 4 years. She paused. He was the teammate I couldn't save. Harwick looked at her carefully. What do you mean, couldn't save? The question landed exactly where it was aimed. She felt it go in and settle somewhere old and specific. The last operation before I separated, she said, there was a situation. Decker was compromised. Not by the enemy, by circumstances. A decision had to be made about whether to extract him through a position that would have exposed civilians. She paused. I made the call to pull back and wait for a second window. The second window didn't come. The report said he was killed in the interim. He wasn't killed, Harwick said. He was captured, and then he wasn't captured anymore, and then he was working for someone else. She looked at the photograph. The intelligence Marsh recovered, she said. Does it indicate what Decker's current role is? Operational planning, Harwick said. Specifically, today's operation. The full weight of that assembled itself in her mind in approximately 4 seconds. Decker had planned the assault on Coastal Summit Medical Center. Decker had designed the approach, the stairwell access, the elevator cycles, the insider compromise, the 3-team structure. He had designed it, which meant he had designed it knowing the facility, knowing the layout, or knowing someone who knew it. She looked up from the photograph. He knows I work here, she said. Harwick didn't answer immediately, and the pause was its own answer. The intelligence package, she said. The photographs. The current locations of everyone in that picture. Something was assembling that she did not like the shape of. The attack today wasn't only about Marsh. We don't know that yet. The attack failed, she said. Marsh is alive, the intelligence package is in your custody, 5 of the 6 operatives are in custody, and the van is impounded. She looked at Harwick directly. An operation with this level of preparation doesn't stop because the first attempt failed. And if Decker designed it, he designed a contingency. Harwick's expression told her she was not wrong. We're increasing the security posture on this floor tonight, he said. I'd like you to remain available. The lights went out. Not a partial outage. The whole floor, the emergency strips kicking in simultaneously with the low amber glow that turned the meeting room into something that felt much smaller than it had a moment ago. Through the glass wall, she could see the atrium below going dark in a cascade from east to west, floor by floor. Not a circuit failure. A deliberate cut. She knew the difference from the speed. Harwick was already on his radio. All units, we have a power event building-wide. She was already at the door. Whitmore, Harwick said. Marsh is in trauma 2 on backup power, she said. Backup power runs the ventilators and the monitors, but not the electronic door locks. Every secure door in this building just became a push door. She went through the meeting room door into the darkened atrium corridor without waiting for his response, because the calculation was simple. A building-wide power cut 90 minutes after a failed extraction attempt. In a building where a wounded, high-value target was still in a room that now had no electronic security was not a coincidence. Decker's contingency. She took the stairs rather than wait for the emergency elevator to cycle. 3rd floor to trauma level, 12 steps per flight. She took them in the dark with one hand on the rail and the other tracking the wall because the emergency strips didn't reach the stairwell. She moved fast. She moved faster than was strictly careful because careful was a variable that had just been repriced by everything Harwick had told her. She came through the stairwell door onto the trauma floor at a flat run and immediately slowed to a controlled walk because running on a patient floor in a power emergency caused secondary problems she couldn't afford. Pryor was at the nursing station, working by the light of a portable unit and a phone flashlight propped against a chart holder. He looked up when she came through. Backup kicked in on the critical rooms, he said. Marsh is stable. Everything else is... Where's Lund's team? He blinked. Trauma 2, I think. She went to Trauma 2. Lund was there. Him, Kepner, and the 3rd team member, whose name she still hadn't gotten. They'd staged themselves at the door and inside the room in a configuration that she recognized as a defensive hold. One covering the door, one at the bed, one at the window. Smart. They'd recalibrated when the power went. You already know this isn't a random outage, she said. Lund looked at her. Harwick got on the radio 30 seconds before the power went. Something about Decker. Decker planned today's operation, she said. The power cut is a second-phase action. He'll know the building's emergency layout, which means he knows backup power doesn't cover the electronic locks. She looked at the room's configuration. He'll also know this building's rooftop access points. Why the roof? Because that's where the main backup generator transfer switches are, she said. If you kill those, you kill the backup power on the critical rooms, including this one. Kepner moved without being asked. He went to the room's window, looked up at the angle that would show the roof line, and said, "Movement. Top level of the parking structure, northwest corner." She crossed to the window. The parking structure across the service road from the hospital was 8 stories. From the northwest corner of the 8th level, you had a direct sight line to the hospital's roof access. And if someone had staged there before the power cut— "He's not on the roof yet," she said. "He's in the structure, waiting for something." "For what?" Kepner said. She thought about it for 3 seconds. "For us to concentrate in here," she said quietly. She stepped back from the window. "He expects us to hold this room," she said, "because that's the logical defensive response. Hold the patient, hold the room, wait for law enforcement to sweep the building." She looked at Lund. "Which means he's already positioned for a long-distance solution, not a breach. He's not sending another team through the doors." Lund's jaw went tight. "A shooter. From the structure, distance, angle, backup power on the room goes out, window becomes viable." She was already thinking through the counter moves. "We need to move Marsh." "Moving a chest tube patient is dangerous," she said. "Leaving him in a room that becomes a viable shooting position in approximately 6 minutes is more dangerous. Where in this building is there internal space with no exterior exposure?" The man whose name she didn't know said, "Imaging, sub-level 1, MRI suite." She looked at him. "No windows," he said. "Reinforced walls for the magnetic shielding. Backup power runs the imaging equipment so the lights stay on. And it's a full level below grade." She looked at Lund. "Can we move him safely?" Lund asked her. She thought about the chest tube placement, the sedation level, the portable monitor. "If we do it right and we do it fast," she said. "Then we do it," Lund said. She went back to the nursing station and told Pryor what she needed: the portable monitor, a transport gurney with side rails, the chest tube secured and logged for position change, and the fastest route to sub-level imaging that didn't cross exterior-facing corridors. Pryor looked at her for 1 beat. "Radiology freight elevator," he said. "Service corridor, west side. No exterior walls between here and the sub-level. Get the gurney." He got it. The move took 8 minutes. 8 minutes of controlled precision. Vance, who had been found in his office on the floor below and came without being asked twice, managing the chest tube and the portable monitors, Lund's team running perimeter on the corridor, Pryor handling the gurney with the careful efficiency of someone who had done emergency patient moves in difficult circumstances before. Marsh stayed sedated. His saturation held at 94. They got him into the MRI suite and secured the door at the 7-minute mark. At the 8-minute mark, the backup power relay for the trauma floor flickered and died. Trauma 2 went dark. Through the reinforced walls of the MRI suite, Claire heard nothing. The imaging room was designed to block electromagnetic interference and incidentally blocked most sound as well. But she watched the portable monitor above Marsh's relocated bed and saw his readings hold steady, and she understood that whatever had just happened to the trauma floor's power had not reached sub-level 1. Lund was looking at her. "You moved him 4 minutes before it happened," he said. "I estimated 6, she said. "I was wrong by 2. "You were still 4 minutes ahead of it." She looked at the portable monitor. Marsh's saturation, 94. Rate, steady. "He's all right," she said. "That's the part that matters." Then Harwick's voice came through on Lund's radio. Staticky, the signal degraded by the shielding, but audible. "We have a confirmed shooter position in the parking structure," Harwick said. "Northwest corner, level 8. SWAT is moving to contain. Do not—" Static. "Repeat, do not attempt to—" The signal dropped. Lund looked at his radio. "Harwick." "Nothing." Kepner tried his own unit. "We're shielded down here. Too much interference." She looked at the room's single exit, the heavy door they'd come through, the service corridor beyond it, the freight elevator that would take them back to the trauma level, and from there to any part of the building that wasn't underground and shielded. She looked at Lund. "SWAT will contain the structure," she said. "If Harwick's team is moving to level 8, they'll push him toward the stairwell exits, which means he has approximately—" She calculated the response time, the distance, the structure's layout as she'd observed it from the windows. 8 to 12 minutes before the exits are covered. "Then we hold," Lund said. "If he decides the primary objective is no longer viable, he'll cut his losses and attempt to exit before containment closes," she said. "The parking structure has 3 stairwell exits. SWAT typically seals the primary 2 first." "What's the third?" She had mapped the structure from the supply room window the first week she'd worked here, because mapping was what she did. Northeast corner, she said, connects to an alley that runs behind the loading bay. If he reaches that exit before SWAT gets there, he's in the city, Kepner said. She looked at the door. She thought about Decker, about the photograph, about the 4 years she'd spent fighting alongside a man whose name she'd carried as a ghost weight ever since, and the specific and particular shape of what it meant that he had been alive this entire time, building toward a day that looked exactly like today. She thought about what Harwick had told her. He was operational planning. He had designed this. And she thought about something she had not yet said out loud, something that had been assembling in the back of her mind since she'd read Torres's text, since she'd seen the photograph, since the lights had gone out in a pattern that was too deliberate and too fast to be anything other than someone who knew exactly where the transfer switches were. Decker had designed an operation targeting this specific facility, this specific team, this specific patient. He had also included her photograph in the intelligence package. She was not incidental to this. She looked at Lund. He knows I'm in the building. Lund's eyes changed. What? The intelligence package included photographs of everyone from my element, she said. Current locations. He knows I work here. He knows I was on this floor when the breach happened. She paused. He designed the operation knowing I would be here. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then the operation wasn't only about Marsh, Lund said. No, she said. I don't think it was. Kepner looked at the door. You think he's coming here? She did not answer immediately, because she needed the answer to be right rather than fast. She thought about Decker, about how he moved, how he thought, how he planned, about the 4 years she'd spent training and operating alongside a man who approached every problem the same way she did, by mapping it completely, by identifying every variable, by finding the angle nobody else had looked at. He had designed today to fail in a specific way, not fail catastrophically, fail controllably, in a manner that pushed the target, Marsh, the intelligence package, the people surrounding both, into a predictable defensive configuration. Sublevel 1, no exterior exposure, shielded, apparently safe. She felt the cold move through her very slowly. He didn't design the power cut to make the trauma room viable for a shot, she said. Lund stared at her. He designed it to make us move Marsh, she said, to a location with one entrance, underground, shielded. She was already moving toward the door. No radio communication. The door to the MRI suite opened from the outside. The door opened inward. Claire was already moving left, away from the door's swing arc, putting the MRI machine's housing between herself and whatever was coming through. Lund went right, instinctive and clean, and Kepner was half a step behind him. The third team member, she'd finally caught his name from a radio exchange, Sorrel, moved to Marsh's gurney and put his body between the door and the patient in the specific way of someone who had decided that was his job and wasn't reconsidering it. The man who came through the door was not Decker. He was young, mid-20s, close-cropped hair, wearing the dark uniform of hospital security. He had his hands up before he was fully through the door, which was either genuine or very well practiced, and his face had the specific quality of someone operating at the edge of their own nerve. Don't. I work here, he said. Building security, night shift. I came down because the freight elevator was cycling and nobody was answering on comms. Lund had him against the wall in 2 seconds, not rough, but absolute. Name. Teller. Marcus Teller. My badge is on my left. Kepner pulled it, read it, looked at the photo, nodded at Lund. Lund released him. Teller straightened his collar with the shaking hands of someone who had just had 4 years taken off his life expectancy by a very brief experience against a concrete wall. The freight elevator, Claire said. You said it was cycling. Yeah. He pulled at his badge lanyard to resettle it. Twice in the last 3 minutes. I came to check because we've had the security protocol from the federal team. Nobody moves in the sublevel without authorization, and the elevator wasn't logged. She looked at Lund. Lund looked at the door. The freight elevator is 20 meters from this room, she said. Kepner was already at the door, and she was right behind him, because if the elevator had cycled twice without a log, it meant someone was using it manually the same way the service elevator on the trauma floor had been used manually this morning, and she was not going to stand in the MRI suite and wait to find out who. The service corridor outside the MRI suite was narrow and low-ceilinged, designed for equipment transport rather than human comfort. exposed conduit along the ceiling, polished concrete floor, a single emergency strip running the length of the passage at ankle level, which made it navigable without being comfortable. The freight elevator was at the corridor's far end, maybe 18 meters. Its indicator light showed it on the level above. Basement 1. Moving down. She held Kepner back with one hand, flat palm against his forearm, the universal gesture, and watched the indicator. It stopped. Sublevel 2. She had not been to Sublevel 2. She had not mapped it, because it was below the hospital's clinical spaces, storage, archived records, mechanical systems, and in her 3 weeks at Coastal Summit she had not had cause to go there. That gap in her knowledge was a problem she could feel the shape of very precisely. "What's on Sublevel 2?" she asked without turning around. Teller, who had followed them into the corridor despite not being asked to, said, "Storage mostly, medical supply archive, building mechanicals at the far end, HVAC, transfer switches, the backup generator relay." The transfer switches. She had been wrong about the sequence. She had been wrong about which part of Decker's plan was the trap and which part was the mechanism. The power cut hadn't been designed to make the trauma room viable for a shot. She'd correctly identified that much, but she'd concluded it was designed to move them to the MRI suite. She'd been half right. It was designed to move them to the MRI suite and then move them out of it, down, because the transfer switches for the backup generator relay were on sub-level 2, and if someone reached those switches and cut the relay, the portable monitor above Marsh's gurney had approximately 40 minutes of internal battery before it failed, and Marsh's chest tube had no mechanical component that would fail, but the drugs maintaining his sedation were on an IV pump that would stop when the pump's battery ran out, which was a shorter window than the monitor. And a patient who came out of sedation with a chest tube in an environment with no working lights and no medical staff except the one who had left to check an elevator. She stopped that line of thought and made a decision. "Kepner," she said, "stay with Marsh. Don't leave that room regardless of what you hear out here. Sorrel stays too." She looked at Lund. "You're with me." "Harwick's team is on level 8 of the parking structure," she said. "The SWAT containment is up there. The radio doesn't work down here. And whoever is on sub-level 2 has a window that closes the moment someone figures out where they are." She looked at him. "We have maybe 6 minutes before they find the right panel." Lund looked at her for 1 second. "Teller," he said, "is there a stairwell to sub-level 2? "End of the corridor," Teller said, "past the elevator." "Take the stairs," Lund said to her. "I'll take the elevator." She shook her head. "If they hear the elevator, they'll know we're coming. Take the stairs with me." He didn't argue. They moved down the corridor fast, past the freight elevator. Its door was closed, indicator still showing sub-level 2, and through the stairwell door at the corridor's end. Sub-level 2 was 1 flight below. She descended with one hand on the rail, not for balance, but for orientation in the near dark, Lund tight behind her. The stairwell door at the bottom was not fully closed. She stopped with her hand against it, listened. Footsteps. One set, unhurried, the pace of someone who believed they were alone and had enough time for the thing they were doing, moving away from the door, deeper into the sublevel. The mechanical systems room was at the far end, Teller had said. She could hear the distant industrial hum of the HVAC in that direction. She pushed the door open 4 inches and looked through the gap. The sublevel was a different building than the floors above. No pretense of clinical environment, just exposed structural concrete and steel shelving units running in long rows, lit by widely spaced utility fixtures, half of which had gone to emergency amber when the main power cut. The shelving created corridors within the larger space, and the person she could partially see was moving through the second row from the left, carrying a flashlight in one hand and something she couldn't fully identify in the other. She pulled the door open and went through. She moved along the rightmost shelving row, using it for cover and for reference, tracking the footsteps by sound. The HVAC was loud enough down here to mask her approach if she was careful, which she was. Lund followed in the specific way of someone who had done enough of this to understand that the person in front was setting the pace and the tempo, and second-guessing those decisions with your own feet was how people got hurt. She reached the end of the first shelving row and looked around the corner. The mechanical systems room was separated from the main storage area by a wire mesh partition with a door in it. The door was standing open, and through it she could see the transfer panels and the relay housings for the backup generator system. She could also see the person standing in front of the main transfer panel, and she could see that what they were carrying in their other hand was not a tool. It was a shape charge. Small, professional, designed for a panel this size. It was not Decker. The person at the panel was a woman, late 40s, work clothes, nothing that would mark her as out of place in a building full of medical staff and federal investigators. She was moving with the compact efficiency of someone who had done demolition work before and knew exactly which component of the transfer panel would cause the most useful failure. Claire was 11 meters away. The woman placed the charge against the lower relay housing and reached into her jacket pocket. "Don't," Claire said. The woman turned. She was fast, faster than Claire had budgeted for, and she had the detonator out of her pocket and in her hand before the word had finished. She held it up. Not the gesture of someone who was frightened, the gesture of someone making a negotiating position. "Stop where you are," the woman said. Her voice was accented, not strongly, but enough. Eastern European, Claire assessed, which was information she catalogued without acting on it yet. Claire stopped. 11 meters. The charge on the relay housing was compact, but it was in contact with the panel itself, which meant it wasn't designed only to destroy the relay. It was designed to initiate a fire in the panel that would propagate through the transfer system. They were in a concrete sublevel with no exterior windows, which meant the fire suppression system in this room was the primary line of defense against a panel fire spreading to the building's core electrical infrastructure. She looked at the fire suppression head directly above the transfer panel. It was a standard sprinkler head, activated by heat. "You set that off, the building burns," Claire said. "The suppression system." "The suppression system in this room responds to heat, not smoke," Claire said. "The charge you've placed is on a metal housing that will conduct the heat laterally before it rises to the activation point. By the time the sprinkler triggers, the fire has already reached the cable runs." She watched the woman's expression. "You know this, or you wouldn't have chosen that specific housing." A beat. "So we both know what happens if you trigger it," Claire said, "which means you're holding that detonator because you want something, not because you've already decided to use it." The woman's eyes moved to Lund, who had come in behind Claire and was standing to her left and slightly back. Not a flanking position, just the natural geometry of the space. "Two of you," the woman said. "There are federal agents in the building," Claire said. "SWAT in the parking structure. Every exit is being covered. Whatever the extraction plan was, the extraction plan is no longer your concern." "Then why are you still here?" The woman looked at her. Something moved in her expression that wasn't fear exactly, more the specific quality of a person who has run their calculation and found the numbers have changed and is now running it again with the new variables. "You're not the primary contact for this operation," Claire said. "You're the contingency, which means you don't have full information about why today failed." She watched the woman's hands. The detonator hand was steady. The other was not quite as steady. "It failed because the original approach was designed to fail in a specific way. Whoever planned this, you don't know who planned this." "His name is Decker," Claire said. "He served with me for 4 years, and he designed this operation specifically to pull everyone's attention upward while someone accessed the sublevel from below." She paused. "You were never supposed to get out of here." The woman's left hand stopped moving entirely. "He staged you here as a delay mechanism," Claire said. "Your job was to make enough noise, the elevator, the panel, to pull responders away from the patient room. You're not an extraction asset. You're a distraction." The woman looked at the detonator in her hand. Something was happening in her face that Claire recognized. Not the calculation of a professional, but the older and more human process of a person realizing they have been used. "He's already gone," Claire said. "He's been gone since before the power cut. He staged everything tonight so that he could move while every person in this building was looking somewhere else." A silence. Then Lund said from 2 steps behind Claire, "She's right. The northwest corner of the parking structure, that was a decoy position. The movement Kepner saw. He wasn't there. He put someone there to be seen." The woman looked between them. "Put the detonator down," Claire said. "The building doesn't need to burn, and you need to tell us where he went." The woman set the detonator on the floor of the mechanical room. She sat down on the concrete beside it, which was not quite what Claire had expected. Not the dramatic surrender, just a person making the small physical concession of taking her weight off her feet, like someone who had been standing for a very long time and had finally run out of reasons to keep doing it. "I don't know where he went," the woman said. "I was given a location and a task. I don't know the full plan." "What location were you given?" Lund said. "A contact point, after the panel, outside the building, 3 blocks east." She paused. "It was for an extraction. For me." Another pause. "But I was told to wait for a signal before I moved to it." "What signal?" "My phone." She looked at her jacket pocket. "It hasn't come." Lund met Claire's eyes across the distance. The signal was never coming. Decker had not intended to extract her. She had been positioned to be found, to occupy responders, to give him the 12 to 15 minutes he needed to move from wherever he'd actually been in the building to wherever he was going. 12 to 15 minutes. She looked at her watch. The power cut had happened at 7:41. It was now 7:59. 18 minutes. He already had 18 minutes. She left Lund with the woman and the detonator and went back through the storage area to the stairwell and up to sub-level 1 and through the freight elevator to the trauma level. And she was moving fast enough that she nearly ran into Agent Harwick coming off the main elevator with 2 of his team behind him. He looked at her. "Sub-level?" "Contained," she said. "Lund has it. Decker wasn't in the parking structure. It was a decoy position." She fell into step beside him. "He's been in the building." Harwick absorbed this without breaking stride. "The SWAT team found someone, but it wasn't him," she said. "He used a decoy up there the same way he used the woman in the sub-level. He needed 12 to 15 minutes of clear movement inside." She looked at Harwick. "Is the building exterior sealed?" "Since 1900, Harwick said. "Every exit, every loading access." She stopped walking. Harwick stopped beside her. "Every exit," she said. "Every standard exit." She thought about the building schematic on the emergency management terminal. She had looked at it twice, once when she was identifying access points for the breach response, and once when she was planning the route to the MRI suite. She had looked at it twice, and she had not been looking for internal connections. "The hospital shares a service infrastructure with the parking structure," she said. "Mechanical systems, building management. There's a utility corridor connecting the two at sub-level 1. She looked at Harwick. "Your perimeter is on the building's exterior, but the parking structure is outside the perimeter." Harwick was already on his radio. "If he's in the utility corridor right now," she said, "he exits into the parking structure, and from the structure he has multiple vehicle exits that your ground units can't see from the hospital perimeter." Harwick spoke into his radio quickly, precise, the compressed language of a man relaying tactical information to people who knew how to act on it. She heard the response, fragmented, staticky, but the tone was clear. The utility corridor access in the parking structure had not been part of the original perimeter assessment. She looked at the emergency management terminal, pulled up the building schematic, found the utility corridor connection on sub-level 1, and traced it from the hospital's sub-level 1 mechanical room through a shared infrastructure passage, emerging into the parking structure's P1 level. The passage ran 200 meters beneath the service road. She measured the distance in her mind, walked it at a controlled pace. 12 minutes. If Decker had entered the utility corridor at 7:41, the moment the power went, he had been in the parking structure for 6 minutes already. "Tell your ground units P1 level," she said, "northeast stairwell, because that's where the corridor emerges, and the northeast stairwell is the one that connects to the alley. The same exit I identified for the 6th contact earlier." She had identified it earlier. She had told Lund about it. And then she had gone to the sub-level, and nobody had sealed the northeast stairwell from the parking structure side because the perimeter was on the hospital building and not the structure. Harwick relayed it. 30 seconds of silence while the ground units moved. Then the radio crackled with something she couldn't fully parse, and Harwick's expression went through 3 changes in 2 seconds. "He was there," Harwick said. "P1 level, northeast stairwell. Ground units have a sighting." "Was," she said. "He made the alley." Harwick's jaw tightened. "Units are in pursuit." She stood at the terminal and looked at the building schematic and thought about Decker. About how he moved, how he planned, how he had walked out of a situation that had consumed 6 other people and left every one of them in custody or in a concrete sub-level sitting next to an unused detonator. She thought about the 4 years she'd spent beside him, and what she knew about how his mind worked when the plan had been executed and the extraction was live. He would not go to the contact point, The contact point was burned. He'd burned it himself when he'd staged the woman there without intending to extract her. He had a secondary. He always had a secondary. She knew that because she had trained the same way. Redundancy at every decision point, never one route out when you could build 3. She thought about the alley behind the loading bay. The alley ran east for 4 blocks before it intersected with a main arterial road. At the 3rd block there was a parking lot. She'd seen it on her route to work, because she noticed parking lots the same way she noticed camera gaps and gate arms. It was a private structure, commercial, and at 8 o'clock on a weekday evening it was largely empty. A vehicle staged there for 72 hours would not have been flagged. She picked up the desk phone and called Sergeant Okafor's cell, which she'd noted from the incident report exchange earlier. Okafor answered on the 2nd ring. "Commercial parking structure," Claire said. "3rd block east of the hospital on the alley behind the loading bay. I need your units there now. Not pursuing down the alley, ahead of the alley, cutting off the exit." A pause. "Whitmore." "I know. You're a nurse." "I know that too. Will you send the units?" Another pause, the kind that had a radio call happening on the other side of it. Then, "Units are moving." She put the phone down. Harwick was watching her. He had the expression of a man who was running a significant internal revision and had been running it most of the afternoon, the ongoing process of recalibrating who and what Claire Whitmore was against the evidence the day had been generating. "The parking structure 3 blocks east," he said. "Secondary extraction point," she said. "If I'm right." "And if you're wrong?" "Then your units close off one more alley and Decker has another route I haven't identified," she said. "But I'm not wrong." She wasn't certain of that. She had been wrong twice today, about the 4th contact in the stairwell and about the sequence of Decker's trap in the sublevel. She was aware of those errors and their cost, but she also knew Decker, and knowing him was a form of intelligence that no file could fully capture, and the parking structure 3 blocks east was where she would have staged, so it was where he had staged. The radio on Harwick's belt gave its fragmented burst. She watched his face. He looked at her. "They found the vehicle," he said. "Staged in the E structure, but..." He paused. "The pursuit units are reporting a secondary contact at the scene. Armed. The ground units are taking fire." She was very still. "Decker had someone waiting at the secondary point," Harwick said. "Armed cover for his extraction." She had not accounted for that. She had identified the location correctly, and she had not accounted for the person waiting in it, because she had been thinking about Decker's exit and not about what Decker would have put between himself and the people chasing him. She heard the distant report of gunfire through the building's walls, faint at the range of 3 blocks, barely audible over the HVAC and the building's ambient systems. But she heard it. "Call back Okafor's units," she said. Harwick looked at her. "They're in pursuit. They're walking into a prepared defensive position," she said. "The person at that vehicle is not there to fight. They're there to create enough suppression to cover Decker reaching the vehicle. The moment he's in, they stop firing and they move." She looked at Harwick. "If Okafor's units are in the kill zone of that position..." Harwick was already on the radio. The call came back in pieces. Units taking cover. 1 officer down. Not critical. She heard the word ambulatory. And the pursuing units had broken off and established cover positions as Harwick's instruction came through. And in the space that the pulling back created, the vehicle at the commercial structure's P1 exit accelerated through the gate arm and turned east onto the arterial road. She heard it on the radio. A dark SUV, partial plate, eastbound at high speed. She stood at the emergency management terminal and felt the specific and unpleasant sensation of a person who has been right about one thing and wrong about the adjacent thing, and who must now account for both at once. Decker was out. He was in a vehicle, moving, with a 70-second head start on any pursuit unit that had been pulling back from his defensive position. In a city the size of Tacoma on a weekday evening, 70 seconds at highway speed was an enormous margin. Harwick relayed the plate fragment and the direction and the description to every unit he had, and Claire stood at the terminal and looked at the building schematic still open on the screen, which was no longer useful for the immediate problem, and processed what the day had become. 5 operatives in custody. 1 woman in the sublevel who had not used her detonator. 1 officer with a non-critical injury. Marsh stable in the MRI suite on sublevel 1. Decker in an eastbound vehicle with a partial plate and a working extraction route she had identified too late to close. She had been right about most of it. She had been wrong about enough of it. She looked at Harwick. He was still on the radio, voice low, running multiple frequencies at once with the particular efficiency of someone who had done crisis coordination for long enough that it no longer required his full attention. Part of his attention was on her. "The intelligence package," she said. "The one Marsh recovered. Where is it now?" Harwick lowered the radio slightly. "Secured. Taken off Marsh during the chest tube procedure and logged into evidence." "What's in it beyond the photographs?" Harwick looked at her for a moment, long enough that she understood he was deciding something. "Operational plans," he said. "Detailed, covering a sequence of actions, not just today's operation. A timeline." He paused. "The target sequence in the package today was listed as Phase 2. She felt the cold again, not in her neck this time, lower. "What was Phase 1? "Phase 1 was 3 weeks ago," Harwick said. "A compromised data transfer in a DoD contractor facility. The data transferred was personnel files, specifically the files of former Special Operations personnel now working in civilian roles." She looked at him. "Your file was in the transfer," Harwick said. "Your current address, your place of employment, your civilian identity." She had been right that she was not incidental to this operation. She had not yet fully understood how central she was. "What's Phase 3? She said. Harwick looked at his radio, then at her. "We don't know," he said. "The package covers Phases 1 and 2 in detail. Phase 3 is indicated but not described. There's a single notation." He paused. "It says, 'Target will know what it means.'" She stood with that. Target. She thought about about the photograph. About 4 years of operating alongside a man who planned with total redundancy, who never left a variable unaccounted for, who had designed today's operation to move her, not just the team, not just the hospital, but her specifically, through a specific sequence of decisions. The elevator cycles, the power cut, the sublevel, the utility corridor. She had moved through every position he had designed. She had been one step behind him for the last 18 minutes. And the notation said, "Target will know what it means." She thought about the last thing she knew about Decker before today. The mission. The decision to pull back and wait for a second window, the window that hadn't come. She had left him. That was what she had done, and she had spent 3 years carrying it as a casualty, as a failure of timing and luck and the brutal arithmetic of field decisions. She had not carried it as something that had survived, as something that had grown into this. She looked at the schematic on the terminal. Not the building schematic. The city map she had pulled up to calculate the alley route, eastbound on the arterial. East of Tacoma, the arterial ran through 3 districts before it reached the interchange where it split, north toward Seattle, south toward the state line. She looked at Lund, who had come up from the sublevel during Harwick's radio exchanges and was standing near the elevator with the quiet patience of someone who had put together enough of the situation to know that the next decision mattered. "Marsh," she said, "is he stable?" Kepner says yes. "He needs to be in a different facility before morning," she said. "Not this one. Somewhere Decker doesn't know." Lund nodded. "I'll start making calls." She looked at Harwick. "Phase 3. Whatever it is." She stopped. Her phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. The number was not in her contacts. The area code was not local. The message was 4 words. "You should have waited." She stared at the screen. The number was a burner. She knew that before she'd finished reading. Untraceable in any time frame that mattered. He had sent it from somewhere he wasn't, through a relay she couldn't backtrack with the tools she had. But he had sent it, which meant he wanted her to know he was watching. Not the building, the situation. He had access to information about what was happening inside Coastal Summit Medical Center that he should not have had, which meant the woman in the sublevel was not the only asset he'd left in place. She looked at the nursing station, at the trauma floor around her, at the people on it. She looked at Teller, the security officer from the sublevel, who was standing near the elevator with his badge in his hand and his face showing the residue of a very difficult evening. She looked at the charge nurse station, at the staff scheduling board on the wall behind it. She had been mapped the same way she mapped buildings, and there was something on that board, something she was looking at without yet seeing, that told her the access Decker had to the inside of this situation was not a technical asset. It was a person, someone still on this floor. She looked at the scheduling board for 11 seconds. Not because the answer was slow in coming, because she wanted to be certain before she said it out loud. And certainty in this case required her to walk back through every piece of information she had and find the one she'd filed correctly, but connected to the wrong thing. The elevator cycles this morning. 3 cycles. No call log. She had concluded someone had called the elevator manually from inside, and she had been right. But she had assumed that person was the security officer at the desk, because the desk officer had the motive and the access and the tired-face plausibility of a man who'd been compromised without fully understanding the consequences. The desk officer had been compromised. That part was true. But the elevator, the East Bank elevator, sub-level to trauma floor, 3 cycles between 11 and 12:15, had been logged to a different ID tag. The facilities employee had told her it was a security administration tag. Senior level. She looked at the scheduling board. The trauma floor's charge nurse rotation was listed there. Sandra Kowalski, day shift. Below it, the afternoon charge. A name she'd seen on charts all day but hadn't registered as significant because she'd been looking at other things. Reeves, P. Afternoon charge, trauma. She looked at the nursing station, at the woman behind it, mid-50s, efficient, the kind of presence that ran a floor without making noise about it. Patricia Reeves had been on the trauma floor since the federal agents arrived. She'd been in every briefing cluster, every corridor conversation, every position where information moved. And her ID tag, Claire now recalled, was clipped to a lanyard with a secondary badge beneath it. A building access card with a different color stripe than the standard nursing credentials. The kind of stripe that indicated dual department authorization. Facilities and clinical. She crossed the floor to where Harwick was standing. The access log for the East elevator, she said quietly. The senior security administration tag that the facilities employee flagged. Pull the full authorization chain for that tag. Not just the name registered to it. Who authorized the dual access? Harwick looked at her. His eyes moved once to the nursing station, then back. How long? She said. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. 12 seconds later, his phone returned a response that he read without expression. The dual access tag was authorized 8 months ago, he said, co-signed by the hospital's security director and a pause. The trauma floor's senior charge nurse. Patricia Reeves, Claire said. Patricia Reeves, he confirmed. She looked at the nursing station. Reeves was behind it, writing in a chart, the picture of someone doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing at the end of a difficult shift. The picture of someone who had been in that position all day and had never done anything obviously wrong. She didn't breach the building, Claire said. She provided the access architecture that made it possible. She authorized the tag, she called the elevator during the window, and she's been feeding Decker's network information about who is on this floor and what's happening on it. She paused. The text he sent me. He knew we were moving Marsh to the sublevel. He knew before the ground units had a sighting. She told him. Park set his phone in his jacket pocket with the deliberate care of someone deciding on a sequence. Stay here, he said. She didn't agree to that, but she didn't follow him immediately either, because the most useful thing she could do in the next 90 seconds was not walk across the floor behind a federal agent. The most useful thing was to stay where she was and watch Patricia Reeves's face from a distance, because a person who has been operating an intelligence asset for 8 months inside a hospital has made a practice of reading the room, and if she saw Harwick coming directly and purposefully across the floor toward her, she would have 10 seconds to make a decision about what to do with her phone. Claire moved to the supply cart near the station, 6 feet from the desk, the natural position of a nurse restocking at the end of a shift, and began moving items from one shelf to another with the unhurried rhythm of someone with nothing more interesting to do. Reeves didn't look at her. Harwick arrived at the desk from the corridor side angle, which meant he'd gone around the long way, which was the right call. He put both hands on the desk, not on Reeves, not reaching for anything, and said something in a voice too low for Claire to hear. Reeves looked up from the chart. Her face did not do what guilty faces typically did on television. It didn't go white or rigid or suddenly expressive. It went very, very still, in the way of someone who has been carrying a weight for long enough that the moment of being found doesn't feel like a shock. It feels like the last step of a long walk finally reaching its endpoint. She set down her pen. She did not reach for her phone. She looked at Harwick and said, at a volume that Claire could just catch, I want a lawyer before I say anything. Which was, Claire thought, the most honest thing the woman had said all day. Harwick's second agent came from the elevator side and the third from the stairwell, and Patricia Reeves was escorted off the trauma floor of Coastal Summit Medical Center without handcuffs, but without any remaining ambiguity about what was happening. She walked past Claire without looking at her. Claire watched her go and felt something that was not satisfaction, more the particular flatness of a thing that needed to be done being done, stripped of whatever catharsis people assumed these moments produced. Reeves was gone. The floor was still a floor. The patients in it still needed their care. She went back to her charts. She was there for 40 minutes, finishing documentation, handing off to the evening staff, who had finally been allowed back on the unit, writing the clearest and most complete incident report she had ever written in her life, which covered everything from the 1140 stairwell observation through the sub-level confrontation through the text message on her phone, because all of it was evidence now, and evidence needed to be accurate and complete and written while the details were still sharp. When she finished, she set her pen down and sat for a moment. Her jaw had reached the stage of aching that settles in after the initial impact has processed. Low and constant, a reminder that the afternoon had been physical as well as cognitive. Her shoulder was worse than she'd admitted to the sergeant earlier. Not serious, but present. She picked up the pen again and wrote one more line in the report. Personal injury sustained during subject restraint, contusion to left jaw, suspected soft tissue bruising to left shoulder, declined formal treatment. Will self-monitor. She filed the report. Then she sat in the chair behind the nursing station for a moment, and for the first time in approximately 9 hours, she did not have an immediately actionable problem in front of her, and she didn't quite know what to do with that. Lund found her there. He sat down in the chair across the station desk without asking, which she appreciated because asking would have made it formal, and formal was not what either of them had the bandwidth for. He looked like a man who had been through a day that bore no relationship to the day he had planned, and he wore it the way people wore that kind of day when they had enough experience to know that survival was already a reasonable outcome. Marcia's being transferred at 0400, he said. Different facility, different city, he knows what you did. He was awake when we moved him, she said. He knows enough. I wanted me to tell you something. She waited. He said, and I'm quoting exactly, because it was the morphine talking, and I want you to have the full context. He said, tell her she was right about the arm and right about everything else, and I owe her a significant debt. She thought about the bleed at the inferior edge of the dressing, the thing she'd flagged at 10:47 and been dismissed for. He doesn't owe me anything, she said. That's just the job. He disagrees. Lund paused. So do I. She looked at him. He had the expression of a man who is choosing words carefully, not because he was hiding something, but because the words mattered, and he understood that she was not someone who responded well to words used carelessly. What I said this morning, he said, in the corridor. You told me to stand down. Yes. You were doing your job, she said. You assessed a threat environment and you controlled access. The assessment was wrong, but the instinct was right. The assessment was wrong because I assumed, he said. That's different from an instinct. She thought about that. About the particular category of error that came not from bad judgment, but from not asking the question in the first place. From looking at a young woman in scrubs and filing the answer before the question had been asked. Yes, she said. It is different. He nodded. He had, she thought, spent some portion of the afternoon taking himself apart over this, and she was not going to reassemble him with easy absolution, because that wasn't what he needed, and it wasn't what she had. But she also wasn't going to let him carry more than was actually his to carry. You adjusted, she said. When the situation changed, you adjusted. That's the part that mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Decker. Harwick's team will find him, she said. It came out more certain than she felt because she wasn't entirely certain, and she'd spent enough of the day being wrong about things to maintain appropriate humility about the remaining open questions. The intelligence package gives them the organizational structure. The woman from the sub-level is cooperating. The desk officer is cooperating. The network he was working inside is compromised. But he's in the wind right now. He's in the wind right now, she agreed. Lund looked at the nursing station, at the floor behind it. He designed the whole thing around you. Around both of us, she said. He knew what I'd do with every piece of information he fed me. He used that knowledge as a mechanism. She paused. It almost worked. Almost. The woman in the sublevel didn't use the detonator, she said. That was the part he didn't account for. He planned her as a sacrifice. She was positioned to be found and to delay us and to be left there. He didn't plan for her to hear the truth about what she was to him and to make a different choice. She paused. People make different choices when they understand what they're actually part of. Lund looked at her. Is that what you learned today, or something you already knew? She thought about it honestly. Both, she said. He stood up. He straightened his jacket with the automatic gesture of someone returning from wherever the conversation had taken him back to the professional surface. Then he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, in my unit, what you did today, any piece of it, would have been worth a commendation. The whole of it. He shook his head slightly. I don't have the right paperwork for what you did today. She looked at the incident report she'd just filed, at the charts behind it, at Bed 7's scan result that had come back an hour ago, showing the things she'd suspected and that had been caught and addressed before it became the other kind of problem. The report's filed, she said. That's enough paperwork. He almost smiled. Then he went. She stayed for another 20 minutes, tying off the last administrative threads, because the floor still needed to function, and function required documentation, and documentation was what she did. Whether the day had been ordinary or the opposite of that. When everything was in order, she clocked out at 10:41, 4 hours and 11 minutes past the end of her scheduled shift, and took the main elevator down to the lobby. Harwick was waiting there. She'd expected him to be somewhere else, managing the operational fallout, coordinating between his team and the pursuit units and the legal apparatus that was beginning to assemble around the 5 men in custody and the woman from the sublevel and the desk officer who was cooperating. He had more than enough to occupy him. He was waiting in the hospital lobby. He was apprehended, Harwick said. She stopped. 40 minutes ago, Harwick said. State police on the highway, 80 miles east. A vehicle stop on the plate fragment. The pursuit units had distributed it to every agency within a 3-state radius. He attempted to run on foot. A pause. He didn't get far. She stood in the lobby of Coastal Summit Medical Center and processed that. Decker was in custody. The man she'd spent 3 years carrying as a ghost, as her failure, as the cost of a decision that had seemed right and then seemed catastrophic, and then had never fully resolved into either category, was in custody 80 miles east, and he was alive, which was more than the report had given him, and he had not gotten far, which was something she was trying not to feel too specifically about. He said something, Harwick said, when they took him. The state trooper relayed it because it was unusual. She waited. He said, she was always better at this than me. Harwick paused. The trooper didn't know what it meant. She did. She knew exactly what it meant. She knew it the same way she knew his planning patterns and his redundancy structures and the secondary extraction point 3 blocks east, because she had spent 4 years inside the same formation as him, thinking through the same problems, and she had always known that the gap between them was not as wide as he'd pretended, in the field or outside it, and she had never said that out loud because saying it out loud had seemed like vanity rather than accuracy. It was accuracy. She had been better at this than him, better at reading the room, at adjusting to what changed, at holding 2 things in her hands at once, the tactical problem and the human one, the patient in bed 7 and the elevator cycling 3 times, the woman in the sublevel with a detonator and the better choice available to her. Decker had built his plan around her capabilities as a mechanism. He had used what he knew about her to design an operation that moved her through a sequence of decisions like a ball through a track. And she had moved through most of it exactly as he'd predicted, but at the end she had been faster than his prediction. Not because she was smarter, not because she had information he didn't. She'd had less information than him at almost every point. She had been faster because she had stopped trying to predict what he would do next and started trying to understand why he had done what he'd already done. And why was a different question with a different answer. He had built an elaborate mechanism to get her attention. That was what the whole day had been. Not the intelligence package, not the extraction, not even the assault on the hospital. The text message. You should have waited. 4 words from a man who had spent 3 years building toward a confrontation that would tell her she had been wrong. She had not been wrong about the decision. She had made the right call with the information she had. He had survived in circumstances she hadn't known about and turned that survival into this, which was a choice he had made, and that choice was his to carry. She looked at Harwick. What happens now? Federal charges, Harwick said, for him and for the organization. The intelligence package Marsh recovered gives us the operational leadership structure. This ends today's operation, but it also ends the organization that funded it. He paused. Trials will take time, but the cases are solid. The desk officer. Cooperating fully. His attorney is already negotiating. Harwick paused. Reeves is going to be harder. She understood what she was part of. She authorized that access knowing it was going to a non-hospital entity. That's not inadvertent. But she also didn't make a phone call when she could have, and the detonator wasn't used, and those things are going to matter to someone in a courtroom. And Decker. Harwick looked at her steadily. He'll spend the rest of a very long time in a federal facility, he said. That I can tell you with confidence. She nodded. Harwick reached into his jacket and produced a card. There are people who would like to talk to you, he said. Not about this specifically, about a longer-term conversation. He held the card out. You don't have to call. She took the card, looked at it. The seal on it was one she recognized. I'm a nurse, she said. Yes, Harwick said. A nurse who assessed a building infiltration before it occurred, neutralized 5 armed operatives, identified an insider asset, moved a critical patient 40 minutes ahead of a secondary attack, and located an outside operative's extraction route from a city map. He paused. You can be both things. She looked at the card. She thought about what she'd told Lund, about measuring days and targets versus measuring them in something else, about the specific and deliberate choice she'd made when she'd traded the uniform for the scrubs, and what that choice had meant, and whether it had worked. It had worked. That was still true. Most days it had worked, and today was not most days. And holding today against the decision was the same error as holding the mission against the earlier decision, judging the framework by the worst thing that had happened inside it rather than by everything else. She put the card in her pocket. I'll think about it, she said. Harwick nodded. He left. She walked out of the hospital lobby into the parking lot, which smelled of rain that had come and gone while she was underground, and the particular washed clean quality of Tacoma air after weather, and the distant exhaust of the police vehicles still staged at the perimeter. Her car was where she'd left it at 6:18 that morning. She sat in it for a moment without starting it. Her jaw throbbed. Her shoulder was going to be significantly worse tomorrow. She was going to need to call her own physician in the morning, which she had been putting off doing for 3 weeks about an entirely different matter. And she was going to need to do it now because today had accelerated the timeline on taking care of things she'd been neglecting. She thought about Marsh at 0400, being moved to a different facility in a different city with better oxygen readings than he'd had at noon, and a chest tube that had been placed correctly, and a fighting chance that had not existed 6 hours ago. She thought about Bernard in bed 7, whose scan had come back and whose escalating respiratory rate had turned out to be the early indicator of a complication that was now being managed rather than discovered at 3 in the morning when it would have been considerably less manageable. She thought about the woman in the sublevel, sitting on the concrete beside a detonator she hadn't used, because someone had told her the truth about what she was part of, and she had made a different choice. People did that. Given the truth in a moment, people made different choices than the ones they'd been pointed toward. She had spent years in environments that required her to believe otherwise, that people were fixed in their decisions, that the only variables were position and timing and firepower. And she had left those environments partly because she had started to understand how wrong that was. She started the car. 12 minutes home. The same route she'd driven that morning, the police substation, the camera gaps, the parking structure with the compromised gate arm that she was fairly certain was now hosting a forensics team. Desmond's coffee cart was closed at this hour, the umbrella folded, the cart locked. She drove through the intersection where it was staged and thought about tomorrow morning. Medium black, no sugar, exact change, the same as always. She had a morning shift tomorrow, 6:15 start. Bed 7 would need a follow-up on the new medication protocol, and Bernard would probably ask about the scan results in the particular roundabout way of a patient who already knew the answer and wanted confirmation. The IV on bed 12 would need another check at noon. The trauma floor would have a new charge nurse for the foreseeable future, and the floor would be disrupted in the specific way floors were disrupted when a member of their senior staff was escorted out by federal agents, and that disruption would need tending. She could do that. That was her job, and she was good at it. She admitted to herself in the quiet of the car on the 12-minute drive, the person who had moved a critical patient 40 minutes ahead of a secondary attack, who had assessed a building infiltration before it occurred, who had identified an extraction route from a city map and a knowledge of how a specific man's mind worked after 4 years of shared training. She was both of those people. She had always been both of those people. The thing she had spent 3 years trying to leave behind. The training, the instinct, the particular quality of attention that moved through a room cataloging threats before it cataloged anything else, was not a contamination of the person she was trying to be. It was a part of it. It had kept people alive today, not despite what she was now, but because of the specific combination of what she had been and what she had chosen to become. A nurse who could map a building and read a patient at the same time. A former soldier who had traded one form of protection for another without ever stopping protecting. She pulled into her apartment parking lot, sat in the car for one more minute. Tomorrow would be ordinary. She would make it ordinary because ordinary was the structure inside which the real work happened. The vital checks, the medication timing, the small exact acts of someone paying attention. When paying attention was what stood between a patient and the worst version of their situation. Ordinary was not lesser. Ordinary was the whole point. She thought about what it had cost her to understand that. The deployment, the decision, the 3 years of carrying Decker as a ghost. The morning she'd applied to nursing school with the same methodical focus she'd applied to everything else. Not because she was certain it was right, but because she was certain she needed to stop measuring the world in the terms she'd been given and start finding her own. She had found her own. And today, when the terms of the old world had come crashing through the fire door of the East Corridor at 12:54 in the afternoon, she had used everything she was, all of it, none excluded, to keep her people alive. Her patients, her floor, her hospital. She got out of the car. The night air was cold in the specific way of Pacific Northwest autumn, and she stood in the parking lot for a moment breathing it, and her jaw ached and her shoulder ached, and she was tired in a way that went deeper than the body, and tomorrow she had a 6:15 start, and none of that was a contradiction. She had once carried a weapon because she believed that protection required a particular kind of force, applied at particular angles, against particular threats. She still believed that. She had learned, however, that force was not only physical, and protection was not only tactical, and the particular kind of strength required to sit with a patient who was in more pain than they were reporting and stay with that patient until someone listened, to flag the chart, to push back against the dismissal, to be quietly and completely correct while everyone around you was treating you as irrelevant, was the same strength she had carried in the field. It had just taken her 3 years to understand that the two things were the same thing. She walked across the parking lot toward her building. The woman they had told to stand down had stood down. She had let them believe she was exactly what they'd assessed her to be, the newest nurse, the quietest presence, the one who could be safely overlooked. And then, because she was Claire Whitmore, and overlooking her had never actually made her smaller, she had done the job, all of it, without asking for their permission or their recognition or their revised understanding of what she was capable of. She had done it because the people in that building needed it done, and she was the person who could do it, and that was always going to be enough reason. She reached the door of her building. She thought about Harwick's card in her pocket. She thought about Lund's word, commendation. She thought about Marcia's message through morphine. She was right about everything. And about the woman on the concrete who had made a different choice, and about Bernard who would ask about his scan results in that careful roundabout way, and about the morning shift in 8 hours, and about Desmond's cart and the exact change already in her jacket pocket. She went inside. The woman they had told was not ready, had been ready since before they'd met her. She had simply been patient enough to let them find out in their own time, at the moment when it mattered most, in the place where it changed everything. That was not a weakness she had overcome. That was the whole of her strength.